All right, welcome back everybody. This is a video about using compression. Now compression is an audio filter or effect that you can use to essentially squeeze the sound. That's what it does, squeeze the sound. I'm going to make a couple analogies to make this easier. You can see the screen and I know it's not in super focus, but it's the best I can do right now. I think it'll work fine. So I'm going to do this on my mixer right now. But what a compressor does, essentially it takes the peak levels, so we're talking about sound level, dB or volume, and it will take peaks and kind of squish them down. Now if I have a landscape, right, where let's say I have a picture and I have these tall mountains in the landscape, well, if I want to show all the mountains and not have them clip, not have them go out of the picture, which is going to be distortion, because there's a limit, right? And that's 0 dB. I can't have anything louder than 0. So if I need to have all the sound with all the peaks, I can have the peaks, but you're going to see less of the land. You're going to see less of the valley floor, let's say it. You're going to see less of the, the terrain. You're going to see lots of mountains. But that's what we want to do in music is really, we want to see everything. We don't want to just be limited by the mountains. So what we can do is we can compress them. Another analogy would be if I'm in a car, right, and I don't have any compression, I don't have any shock absorbers, if I go over a bump, and it's a 1 foot tall bump, I'm going to go up a foot, and that's not comfortable. It's not good. So and then I have to be really careful about where I drive. If I put shock absorbers on the car, and a compressor really works like this, and I go over a 1 foot bump, well, maybe now the car only goes up 6 inches because a lot of that bump is being absorbed by the shock absorber, and that's the way the compressor works. So let's look at it and let's listen. So right now the compressor is not engaged, and I want to draw your attention to this middle bar up here. You'll see that there will be some red coming into this bar from the right side, and that's going to tell us when the compressor is working. All right, and so what we need to do to set the compressor properly is we need to test our sound, and I'm going to be speaking at different volumes to engage the compressor, and I want to get it so I see the compressor coming on, when the sound is loud. Not all the time, but let's listen. Let's check it out. So I'm going to engage the compressor right now. Oops. Wrong button. Okay, so I've engaged the compressor, and you can see there's a line here. There's a couple things here. We're not really worried about that too much. The compressor setting right now is set to 2.5 to 1. Let's just call it 2 to 1. The idea is for every in this case, every 2.5 dB in volume increase in the input, it's going to increase 1 on the output. So it is absorbing over half of the volume change, right? So if I go from 10 to 15 in volume, and let's just say it's at 2 to 1, instead of going from 10 to 15 on the output, it's going to go from 10 to 12 and a half, roughly. All right, so that's kind of how that works. But it's not really kicking in right now because we're not seeing anything in this middle part. So what I need to do to adjust where the compressor starts working, right, is adjust what we call the threshold. And the threshold on this mixer is over here. I'm going to engage it. And now I'm going to lower the threshold. And you'll start to see, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but let's say I want to adjust the threshold so it starts kicking in at, say, minus 20 dB. So when I get down here, is it at... There's minus 20. Now, if I make a loud sound, now, you see the compressor start to work. So anything over minus 20, and minus 20 is going to be kind of the lower end of your typical recording range, right? Maybe you want to go from minus 20 to minus 12 with your very loudest peaks hitting like minus 6, and now we're going to put a compressor on it so that when a sound is over minus 20, the compressor starts working, but remember, it's it's only compressing it to a certain ratio. It's not just squishing everything flat. If it was squishing everything flat, we'd call that a limiter, right? So it can't go over a certain amount. But the compressor is always working on a curve. So I can play with the ratio. I would say good ratio is like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. Pretty typical. This is at 2.5. But I want to show you what happens when we continue to lower the threshold and we start to compress basically everything. So if I go down here and now I'm compressing, like basically everything I'm saying is getting compressed. And you can see in the middle, the compressor is working a lot. It's working on everything I'm saying. And you can hear it in the sound. It's a very weird sound. And that's because I'm telling it to do something. I'm telling the compressor to work all the time. And what the compressor does is it has to digitally, or in some cases analog, but it's, you know, it's manipulating the sound a lot, and it's doing all this math, and it's saying, okay, and I'm going to do all these calculations, and it affects the sound. So I don't really want to do that all the time. I want my voice to sound pretty natural most of the time, because the compressor will, what we call, color the sound or affect the sound. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with, and so that's pretty simple, right? You understand how to set the compressor. And if you're not sure, set it to kick in at -20 and set it to 2 to 1. Now, the only other thing you might want to do with your compressor is what we call makeup gain, or the gain. Because even if you've got your peaks under, you know, you're not clipping, you're not going over 0, but you now are lowering all your peaks. Well, now you've got some extra space there in your recording potential to raise the volume. And that's something that we can use a compressor to do, is to just have a higher signal to noise ratio, because we're lowering our peaks and now we've got some space there. So what we can do is have the output overall go up, which raises all of the softer sounds. It raises our valley floor, right? So we can see more in the picture. So it's literally like taking a picture that has some mountains and just squishing the whole thing so the mountains are not as tall, and now we can see more stuff in the picture. So I'm going to do that down here, and I'm just going to turn this up, and now you can hear the effect of the compressor. I've added some gain, and I'm still not, you know, I'm not clipping, I'm not going over recording levels, but now I have all this sort of extra body in the track, in the recording. So that's another, and I'll just take it out for a second. So instead of recording at this level, which is okay, it's fine. But if it was a live broadcast or something, I might want to crank this up and be really present. And this is what you hear. This is why radio DJs, for example, or new broadcasters have these, their voices are so present. And usually they're very resonant because they're right on the microphone. And they're compressed, and see, that's why they sound like that. And you, in case you didn't know that, now you know. So let's go from this extreme, which is pretty full. We're using the compressor, to disengaging the compressor. And now, if I talk softly, it's pretty soft. All right, so I hope that's helpful. That's how to use a compressor. If you had a compressor that had an absolute limit where it, you know, you're packing all the sound up into and nothing goes over 0, that's called a limiter. A limiter is just basically a hard top compressor, but we use both of them for different things, similar but different. All right, so that's all I've got for you on the compressor. We're gonna do one more on, there's another video on noise gate, and there's a different video on using an equalizer or EQ, so make sure you watch those as well.